Night shift workers, what's the most unsettling thing that ever happened to you in your shift? Story 1. I worked for a moving company restocking the trucks based on supplies they would need that morning. It's a crappy job. Never work for a moving company. Do not do it. Anyways, I'm stocking a truck pulled up to the dock when I realize my vision is getting fuzzy. I'm tired. I rub my eyes. My forearm feels wet, but I figure it's sweat and my vision clears. It happens again. I rub my eyes and my forearm feels wet again. I look at my arm, finally to see hundreds of crushed baby spiders. My vision wasn't fuzzy. Baby spiders were crawling on my eyelashes. I was covered in baby spiders. I ran to the nearest water hose and got everything off. The next morning I had lots of tiny bites on my legs, but otherwise nothing else. Story 2. I used to work at a bowling alley. I had finished closing and I just turned off the lights and was about to leave. Suddenly, one of the lanes turns on. The only way they turn on is a switch in the back. So I turned on the lane lights and started walking back to turn it off. I was just about to go behind the lanes, past the curtain, when it shut off again. We didn't have cameras there, but I really wish we did, because my boss didn't believe me. Story 3. Buckle up, sunshine. I don't do nights anymore, but for years I did nights in residential care facilities. One of the spookiest was in a soul-charged dementia facility. 15 D3 residents and no one but me to keep an eye on them all. Around 3 a.m. in the morning, after doing an intentional round where you check all the residents are safe and well, I hear the doorbell ring. I get a sudden wave of goosebumps because this is a secure facility and it's the middle of the night. I go and look out the window. I blow it off as being a hallucination. 10 minutes later it rings again. I'm crapping myself. I go back to the window and check again. No one there, but I look across the street and a strange car is parked there. I take a photo of it just in case. Then I go back to my station, where I've been playing a game of match the card suits with a delightful but very demented lady. I sit down and she looks at me and says, "What did the gentleman want, dear?" He looked like he had a bad night and needs a cuppa. Chills go down my spine, but I brush it off because hallucinations are common with dementia, and this lady is particularly prone to not being orientated to time and place. The doorbell rings again, less than 5 minutes later, and this time I'm freaking out. Another of my residents is up and walking the hallway, painting with a clean paintbrush to keep him occupied. I pass him on the way to the front window, and he turns to me and says, "Don't answer the door alone, he might hurt you," before carrying on painting. I'm a single 23-year-old female in charge of 15 people with varying stages of dementia, and the effing doorbell keeps ringing in the middle of the night, and it's a weekend, so my on-call won't answer the phone. She never does on the weekends. I look out the window and see the same car as before, and as I'm looking around, I see a shadow move in front of the door, and a person walks around the corner and then looks straight in the effing window next to me. We make eye contact and I scream. My residents start freaking out, I'm freaking out, and the guy just bolts. I call the police, they turn up. It's a chaos because I have 15 residents who all been woken by the commotion, and now have 2 police officers in their space. My on-call isn't answering her phone, and I'm struggling to deal with the whole situation. Eventually, after many cups of tea and a lot of PRN meds for the more challenging residents, we're mostly settled. It's now 7 a.m. and the handover shift arrives of a nurse and a caregiver. I tell them what happens, and they tell me there was a woman down the road whose house has been broken into and she was attacked in her bed by a drug seeker who ransacked her house looking for drugs. I have an internal meltdown because we have drugs in the cupboard in the bedroom. Good drugs too, morphine, fentanyl, etc. I can't help but wonder if he was intentionally looking for us and just took the next best option. For reference, the facility was an old converted boarding house in a gentrified area, so lots of old doctors' houses in the area. Easy to mistake the home I worked at for a regular house. I left that job not long after because they refused to hire a second person to work the nights, despite it being understaffed according to best practice guidelines. I hadn't thought of this in maybe 5 years. Wow. Story 4. Used to be an executive director of a family science museum. We once hosted a human cadaver type exhibit, similar to body worlds. 3 times during the exhibit run, in the middle of the night, the alarm company calls me to say motion sensors are going off in the exhibit hall, but no exterior window or door sensors are tripped. 3 times I had to get out of bed, drive to the museum, and walk the exhibit floor amongst the posed cadavers and specimens with a flashlight to confirm all was well. Never found anything amiss. Story 5. I work in a prison. When I was new, I was working overtime one night in a housing unit that has seen a lot of death. It was well after midnight, and a lot of the offenders were supposed to be in their cells. Since this was a medium security prison, the offenders still had access to leave their cell to use the communal bathroom at night. Well, I was going in for the 2 a.m. count. I watched an offender walk down the stairs from the 2nd level into the bathroom. I stood at the entrance to the bathroom and yelled in to ask them what cell they were in so I could add an extra body to that cell for my count, but got no answer. I then walked into the bathroom and searched everywhere, but found absolutely nobody. I told one of my coworkers about what happened, and the first thing they asked me was he tall and skinny with long dreads? And he had been. When I answered yes, I was told, "That's Mr. Bones. He ended himself a few years ago, but he still hangs around." I still get goosebumps thinking about it. Story 6. I was working at a middle school as a night shift custodian. I cleaned a long U-shaped wing full of classrooms every weeknight. I'd already locked up one set of doors to the wing and was about to lock the ones at the other end of the U. I made the full lap around the wing and had been cleaning there all night alone and came to the end of the hallway where the doors to the rest of the school were. When I shut the lights off, the dark silhouette of what looked like a child ran from across the end of the hallway from left to right. There were doors down there, but I just locked them all up and no one was around. I was so creeped out, I locked the doors connecting the wing to the rest of the school and ran to my car. I always felt like I was seeing things out of the corner of my eye working there at night, but that was the most visible, for sure thing I saw at that place. Story 7. I worked nights driving a taxi cab, and occasionally I'd post up someplace and take a nap waiting for a job. Was waiting at a hospital, since you get good jobs sometimes. The hospital would give patients vouchers to go to another hospital or a shelter. I woke up and someone was sitting in the back. Seems I'd forgotten to lock the doors. They admitted they'd been sitting for a few seconds, but didn't know what to do since I was napping. We had a laugh, and I made $75 off that ride. Better believe I started locking my doors after that though. Story 8. Oh man, I worked as a night shift manager at a 24/7 gas station / fast food place in a sketchy part of town. I have hundreds of stories about the wild shenanigans of crackheads. Most aren't creepy, but more, what the F just happened? Like the guy who gave me a magic crystal to protect me from the apocalypse because I covered the change he needed for some hot dogs. Or the other guy who tried to buy his cigarettes with lawn clippings, stating, "I know it's not weed, but it works almost just as good," before just conking out standing at my register. I'm gonna go with the most unsettling being discovering bodies the first time. 2 regulars OD'd while hiding in my dumpster area. I called 911 and did what little first aid I knew, but the EMT said they'd likely been gone for hours, judging by how cold they were. But I swear to God, I thought I could feel a pulse, and I clearly remember hearing a gurgling noise. Story 9. I used to work out in the Texas desert in Midland, technically Goldsmith, but anyway, I worked out in a warehouse where we shipped drilling motors and collars and other drilling accessories to rigs. Usually it was me and one other dude. Just to set the science, it's a 1.5 miles down a desert dirt road to get to the warehouse that's pretty dimly lit, and we'd get there at about 7 in the evening. I'd gotten there around 7 and did the usual. Paint the received tools, inventory, then go play Xbox till a night truck would come, and I'd either load or unload it. Other dude, James we'll call him, was late all the time, but he was the boss and I didn't really mind the peace and quiet, but never later than 8. So around 9:45, when he didn't show up, I tried to call him. He'd gotten drunk and said he'd be in when he felt like it, so I just kept playing Xbox. About 2 a.m. rolls around and I hear one of the side doors open and assumed it was either James or a driver, but it was a side door that was all the way to the end of the warehouse. I looked out the office window and there was a dude who was not James and not a driver I recognized. I asked from across the way if he was a driver and homie didn't say a thing, so I assumed it was someone messing with me. Dude looks at me and deadass says, "Do you believe in Jesus, our Lord and Savior?" The only thing I could think was I guess I'm about to meet him. Thankfully, this dude was harmless and just wanted 20 bucks. Told me about his drug struggles and said he just needed 20 bucks for a bus. I think about that night all the time because it could have easily been my last. He could have dumped me in the desert and it would have taken days for me to be found. I know this because it happens all the time. Thankfully, I've gotten away from the absolute worst part of Texas and have a much safer job. Story 9. Short version. I was locking up a big warehouse I worked at one night. I turned all the lights off as I went through each section so it was pitch black behind me. I was getting a really creepy feeling I was being watched, like the hair on my arms was standing up. I finished up and was going out the last door to the outside and looked back one more time because I felt so uneasy. Sure enough, I saw a shadow peek out at me behind a wall. I called the cops. They went in the building and ended up shooting the trespassers. It was 2 14-year-old kids that had snuck in before I finished locking up. One of them passed. Story 10. I work in a water treatment and one of our smaller plants is a bit isolated and run by a single operator. It gets densely foggy and once I was near the door and 2 coyotes came out of the fog and stared through the glass and scared the crap out of me. The MCC hums and chatters so it sounds like people are talking all night. I once noticed out of the corner of my eye that the floor was moving and realized the plant had been invaded by small frogs. Related note, frogs make a gross popping noise if you accidentally step on them. I went out to the feed room and found a wolf spider eating a frog. In winter, fog rises up off the basins and it's just creepy. Story 11. 2 things happened when I was an overnight baker in a downtown area. Parking overnights is free in this downtown area, but it can be crowded. First come, first serve. This one night, I parked a block away, and as I was walking to my job, this young guy is riding his bike around me and my car. He followed me close to my job. I was quickly able to get in the building. That morning, when my boss came in, 4 a.m., he told me about his weird experience of this kid on a bike riding around him and his car. That guy did this for a few days until the weekend, getting closer each time. The last time he tried to hit my boss with his bike, but my boss managed to hop between 2 vehicles and walk away safely. We never saw that guy again. 2. In summer, I would sit outside on a well-lit and busy side street, and on this side, at the opposite end, was a federal building with nothing between us but solid building. So this one night, I'm relaxing and I look towards the federal building and see a person completely in shadow walking my way. Even walking under the streetlight, I couldn't see the features of this person. I quickly went in and waited from a somewhat hidden position to see who passed. No one passed at all in the next 10 minutes. I've never felt such malevolence from a person who was just walking. It still bothers me 15 years later. Story 12. Not me, but a friend of mine worked at a water treatment plant on graveyard shift. From what I understand, he was there to check levels, adjust stuff, make sure nothing blew up, Just him. Access doors are unlocked, but he's inside an 8-foot tall, locked barbed wire fence. This place is next to a highway connecting 2 cities an hour away from each other, with not much in between. About 2:30 to 3 a.m., he's killing time playing his Nintendo DS when he hears a voice from behind him go, "Get on the ground." My friend goes cold, complies, he's held at gunpoint. This guy ties him up with duct tape, all while saying he's sorry he had to do this, and steals the keys to his truck, his wallet, cards, etc. He hears him drive off, waits a while longer, and finally calls the police. The guy was arrested later that day. Turns out he'd escaped from inmate custody in the next town over, and was desperate. He'd probably been walking forever. My friend honestly had PTSD of sorts from it for a while. Still works there though. Story 13. I was working as campus security and I had to close down the main law school building. The building was downtown in a major city and was old enough that the tunnels underneath it were used in the Underground Railroad. Think dirt floors and wooden crossbeams, like you would imagine a mine. There was work going on in the tunnels, not sure what it was, but I think they were reinforcing the supports. Anyways, as part of my routine, I had to go around and check to make sure the build was vacant. I climbed down the ladder into the tunnels. All the contractor lights are off. I say a few "hello anyone there" and shine my flashlight around silence for a moment. Then I hear what sounds like a radio tune from the 1920s coming from the tunnel. I immediately climb the ladder and padlock the trapdoor, arm the motion sensors and leave. F that. Story 14. I was alone in an arena doing security. I had to avoid our exhibit area and the backline hallway because it always sounded like there were high heels following you, probably the HVAC. One of our elevators randomly opened almost every time I walked by. It was towards the end of my route when doing my hourly walk around the building, so it freaked me out enough. I only went upstairs if I had to. I had some lighting work to do, so I was about 40 feet in the air when something caught the corner of my eye. I look over at our balcony area that only has one way in and out, and next to one of the seats, I swear I saw someone crouched down staring at me. One of my coworkers had been known to tell ghost stories about the place, so I was sure it was him. For the next hour, I kept seeing the person moving around and hiding in different areas of the balcony, and I swear I heard stiffied laughter. I shouted that I could see them and that I knew who it was. So this time, when I did my hourly lap, I did the building as though and quietly as I could. What had previously taken 15 minutes tops was now taking me 2 hours. I started with that damn balcony. I even booby-trapped the elevator so I could hear someone trying to get by and sneak up the fire escape. There's no possible way someone was up there, and I didn't cross paths with them. To this day, I swear he was there to mess with my head, but I can't figure out how he got past me to leave the balcony. Story 15. I used to work at an overnight vet clinic, and late one night, we didn't have any patients in the clinic. And myself and my coworker were cleaning, and we kept thinking we heard a bark. But that's not uncommon in the village, but it was like 3 AM, and then out of the corner of my eye, I saw a big golden run down the hallway and then vanish. And I looked at my coworker who was sheet white. We'd euthanized a large golden that same night, and the dog was running toward the room that had the freezer in it. Happened again the next night. Oddly enough, the next night, the owners called back and asked for more paw prints, and they wanted the collar they'd forgotten to take off. I'm convinced the dog was sticking around for them. My coworker was terrified. Story 16. I used to work at Taco Bell. I was closing that night with other coworkers, and finally it was time to close. We turn off the outside lights and get a call on the restaurant phone as soon as we turn off the lights. My manager answered and we heard a man speak. I vividly remember him saying, "I know there are only girls in there. I've been watching for a while. Don't come out, I'll be waiting for you." We were all very afraid, but hoping it was a prank call since sometimes kids would prank call. I looked out in our lobby and there was a tall man wearing a blue-collared shirt tucked in the standing at the door facing the other way. We were terrified. We called the cops and we saw the cops speak to him. They'd asked him to leave. We never saw that man again. Story 17. Back when I was a HCA, I was doing my hourly breathing rounds, just poking my head into the doorways, sometimes turning the nightlight on to make sure. And about halfway down the hall, I see a resident sitting up at the edge of her bed facing the doorway. I ask if she's alright and if she needs anything. She was looking down, and as she looks up, her head kind of twists from side to side and looks up, but she maintains eye contact with me. In a hoarse voice, she replies, "Helen isn't here anymore." I effing ran to the nursing station and reported to the nurse. The nurse looks at me and kinda chuckles, saying it's impossible as the resident is a total assist, basically not mobile, and not very verbal. We make our way down there anyways. Not even 2 minutes go by. The resident is tucked nicely in her bed, snoring away as though nothing happened. These were incredibly scary stories, but if you have stories of your own, feel free to write them below in the comments so I can make a video on them in the future. Like the video and subscribe to the channel if you liked it. I'll see you in the next one.